If you're looking for the ultimate spin to win build in New World Aeternum, then this video is for you. In today's video, I'm going to be showcasing a deep dive of the different weapon perks, attribute mixes, combos, and everything else you need to know to test out this build for yourself and play around with it if it's something that you might be interested in. The way I utilize this build is to really be a heavy clump fighter. Now, you can utilize this build in either a medium build or a heavy build. I prefer playing with medium just to give myself a little bit more DPS as well as some movement when it comes to large scale battles. I do not recommend utilizing this build when it comes to 1v1s or even 3v3s for the most part, but it is extremely fun to utilize in larger scale PvP, such as OPRs or even wars in some situations. So enough of that. Let's go ahead and jump into some more of the specifics. And then towards the end of the video, I'll share some more footage about how I'm actually utilizing this build and getting some great success for it. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, first things first, let's go ahead and jump into the specifics to this build, starting with the weapon mastery trees. So let's first take a look at the Great Axe. And right off the bat, you're going to see that I utilize 3 abilities here. I use Charge, Whirlwind, and Maelstrom. Now, I really only use Charge for kind of a get out of jail type of ability here. It's really utilized for fast transportation and a quick way to escape some sketchy situations, right? If I'm in a clump and I can tell that I am definitely losing the battle, I will use Charge to get away. I'll spin away as well and just create some distance between me and the clump so it can reset before I jump back in to dish as much damage as possible. That is really the only ability I utilize in the Reaper side of the tree, but as you can see, I am utilizing a handful of passives. When it comes to the Great Axe, for this build, I really focus on dishing off as much damage as possible and also helping with overall survivability because again, the longer you're alive, the more damage you could potentially deal, right? You don't want to wait for countdown timers to hit 0 just for you to respawn and jump back in. The next ability, of course, is Whirlwind. I pick up all the upgrades for this as well as utilize the Great Axe artifact that supports the Whirlwind perk. That really just helps dish off as much damage as possible. Plus, every spin that I get with the weapon perk also grants Fortify, so it helps my overall survivability as well. Last but not least, I do utilize Maelstrom. Typically, I always try to drop Maelstrom right before my Whirlwind, and that's just to help my overall survivability. While utilizing the weapon perk on a piece of armor, you can actually utilize the weaken debuff on everyone in that clump so that when they dish some damage to you, it is not as hurtful, right? So you really want to just debuff them as much as possible and then spin to win to really just dish off as much damage as possible and just get the W. Next up, we have the Warhammer. Again, I am very focused on the Crowd Crusher. Again, I use this build for clump fights, right? The only perks I use on the Juggernaut side of the tree is boosting armor penetration, helping a little bit with ability cooldowns, as well as just giving me some empower for some heavy attacks while I'm in the clump. The 3 maxed out abilities I use are, of course, Shockwave, Clear Out, and Path of Destiny. Shockwave is typically the first thing I use in my combo. Again, after I get through these weapon perks, I'll share a little bit more specifically about what my combo is, but this Shockwave perk is great. It allows me to weaken the opponents, help my overall survivability, and of course, I use the Shockwave weapon perk on the hammer itself to really get the most out of this. Next up, I have Clear Out. The fact that I am directly in the clump with so many people I could just knock down just really gives me the most out of this ability, right? This second perk here says that I'm actually granted Fortify, not only to myself but also friendlies within a certain amount of distance. Really just helps my overall survivability again, and I'm just trying to dish off as many debuffs and buffs to myself as possible. Path of Destiny, you'll see some gameplay in that in a little bit, but essentially I use Path of Destiny to help heal myself wherever possible. You can not only stagger your enemies, but also get some health from it if you utilize the weapon perk on a piece of armor. Okay, now when it comes to attributes, the way I like to play this build is by hitting a 300-300 between strength and constitution. I have seen people hit 350 strength and 250 constitution. That's totally fine to do as well. I just like making sure that I have this grit ability because I utilize thwarting strikes on my great axe to dish off as much as possible, even when it comes to light attacks and clumps, and it just helps me out and helps me cool down my abilities as well due to refreshing move on it. But again, as you can tell, we pick up a lot of perks when it comes to the overall strength attribute, hitting 300, and then same situation when it comes to constitution. The reason I like to mix it up a little bit and do a split of 300-300 is really just to increase my overall survivability, because keep in mind, with this build, you are in the middle of all the action. You are getting hit by tons and tons of players and tons of different elements and whatnot, and you really are just trying to survive as much as possible while also dishing off a decent amount of DPS. So that's why I split this up. Again, you guys can play around with the build and utilize what you believe is the most effective, but I mean, even over here, you can see I have over 25,000 health, which is great, while also having 300 strength. So I can dish off a lot of damage in large clumps and do my job when it comes to this build. And finally, let's talk about equipment. So most importantly, when it comes to your weapons, you want to make sure you utilize the Tempest Fury. Again, this is a tricky artifact to completely get unlocked because you do need to defeat the worm raid utilizing this weapon in order to fully unlock it. But chances are you might be able to find a decent PvE group to do that, just utilizing like server specific discords and whatnot. If you're having a really hard time finding a Discord for your server, let me know in the comments below and maybe I can help you out with that. In regards to the upgrade perk that I added to this, I included thwarting strikes because again, I do a split 300-300, so my basic attacks do have grit to it as well as a majority of my abilities just to give me some extra DPS and really do some damage. In regards to my hammer, the most important thing here is Sundering Shockwave. This allows you to inflict a bit of a debuff to your enemies. It inflicts rend, which allows you to reduce the target's armor by 15%. So when I'm about to show you the combo coming up, this is probably one of the most important pieces because I inflict the rend on the enemy clump, then I use a maelstrom to weaken their attacks, and then I start spinning to dish off as much damage as possible. As I'm spinning, the enemies are not only weakened in regards to their attack damage towards me is minimized, but also they are receiving more damage due to the debuff that this hammer is dishing off on that clump. In regards to the heart room, I personally like detonate. I've seen people also use vines for this type of build as well. Both are great options. I just like to really jump in those clumps and have some large explosions and dish off as much damage as possible. In regards to jewelry, I am using Ankh. Again, this is a bit of a tanky build, so I really do rely on heals in some situations. You do not need a healer for this build. However, it is extremely helpful if you do, just because of the overall survivability, and you are receiving a lot of damage in these clumps. Next up, this is a very easy ring to get. You can actually craft it right at the gypsum kiln, and the locked perks are both hardy and slash damage. When you craft the piece to 700 gear score, you're going to get a random third perk. Pick and choose whatever you prefer. Personally, I have leeching on it. I think it's fun. It just helps me survive a little bit more, especially since I'm in these large clumps. It's just helping my overall health stay a little bit higher than it should be and just helping me survive as much as possible. And lastly, in regards to the earring, you do have some flexibility here, but I like always running healthy toast, refreshing toast, and then healing heart as well. When you're in clumps, taking damage and pushing out damage, your heart rune is going to charge up very quickly. I'm dropping my heart rune a lot. You'll see in the actual combat footage towards the end of this clip, but the fact that I'm utilizing my heart rune as much as possible just allows me to really get the most out of this perk and just once again maximize my survivability. In regards to your actual gear itself, the primary weapon perks that you're going to want to try to focus on, in my opinion, is 1, definitely Maelstrom, and then 2, definitely Leeching Path of Destiny for your hammer. Now that's kind of a hit or miss. It depends on what you really like to utilize when it comes to these large-scale PvP games. I love Leeching Path of Destiny just because it really does give you a decent boost of health every time you push out this hammer ability here. But again, there are, preferred ways to play this build. I just like maximizing my survivability just because you really are taking tons and tons of damage as much as possible. And lastly, as I mentioned probably 19 times in this video already, just the fact that you're in the clump, you want to maximize survivability. I drop shirking heals on almost every piece. I think I have 4 or 5 pieces right now on my armor. And that just basically says every time I successfully dodge, I get healed. When you're in a huge clump, chances are every time you hit shift or every time you hit dodge, you're at least dodging someone's attack and you're getting that HP boost. You want to watch your stamina. Don't get rid of all of your stamina all in one go because you really want to just get the most out of these shirking heals perks. On top of that, elemental aversion, health, conditioning, it's really up to you to pick and choose depending on what you prefer when it comes to large clump fights. I like elemental aversion personally because I typically find that it's helpful in almost every situation, especially when I'm in a clump. Okay, so now that we covered the overall weapon perks, the overall attributes, the weapon mastery, and equipment, let's go ahead and show you exactly how I utilize the combo when I play this build. It's time to start talking about combos. So let's pretend that these 2 dummies here are the clump that you're about to approach. And the first thing that I always do when it comes to these large clumps is drop a Sundering Shockwave, then a Maelstrom, and then I land my Spin to Win ability right there. After I do that, I start dishing off light attacks. You can tell on the counter in the lower right corner that it's going down much faster because of these light attacks, simply because I have Refreshing Move, allowing me to get to my abilities that much quicker, which I'll then recycle once again between the 3. In regards to these other abilities, if I ever find myself in a tight spot where I'm low on health, my healer is just getting targeted, and I just need to get out of there and reset, I will drop the charge ability and jump around and just restart until I'm ready to re-engage and jump right in and start dishing off more damage like I did before. If you ever have to get out of your spin early, all you have to do is hold block and then you'll just jump right into it. The other 2 hammer abilities, just so you guys have a full picture of how I utilize this build, is a clear out. So if I'm in a large group and my cooldowns are just not fully down, I just need to buy more time, I'll drop a clear out that will push everyone down to the ground and allow me to regain some stamina as well as hopefully some more abilities. And then lastly, Path of Destiny. When I drop this, essentially when I hit targets, I will be healed for a certain percentage of damage that I deal if I am utilizing that weapon perk, which I do just to really get the most out of this build. So that really covers it. I'm going to go ahead and share some actual gameplay now utilizing these combos and the overall build that I just showcased in a little bit more of a real world situation. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So as you can see, right now I'm in a clump. I hit the shockwave, hit the maelstrom, and then I start spinning. Now all of my other abilities are really just to help me out with overall survivability. You'll see I hit a charge every now and then just to get myself out of sticky situations. I do the knockback with my Warhammer just to get some further stuns and whatnot, push the clumps up, get them to regroup. And then, of course, I use the Leeching Path of Destiny just to regain some health in situations if I'm a little bit low. Again, I am constantly gaining my heart rune pretty quickly. And every time I utilize that, I also get a heal. I'm going to go ahead and just continue to let this clip play because, as you can tell, yes, I have a healer, but even if I didn't, the overall survivability of this within clumps makes this build a lot of fun and just very effective in these larger clump like battles. So, again, I have not tested this build out in wars. I think it could be a little bit fun, but again, you're not dishing off a ton of damage like the typical bruiser. Yes, you are dishing off a handful of damage when it comes to large clumps. So maybe if you honestly throw a stack of these guys spinning all together, it could be pretty effective in wars. But again, it's a little bit too risky to really test out in a real war like situation. But again, if you guys enjoyed this video and enjoyed this build and want to try it out yourself, go ahead and give the video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. It just tells me that you like the content I'm pushing out, whether it's guides or builds or anything else related to New World. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.